Rejected Omega was born without a wolf, until she howled during the blood moon and shook the kingdom. The Alpha King's declaration echoed in the still night air, sending shockwaves through the pack. Elara, still standing beneath the blood moon, could hardly comprehend the words that had just left his lips. She was no longer the invisible Omega. She was the Alpha King's mate. The power within her stirred once more, this time with a sense of purpose she had never known. As King Rhyland rose to his feet, his piercing gaze never leaving hers, the pack slowly began to murmur in disbelief. This wasn't just a surprise. It was a moment that would change the kingdom forever. The Alpha King, feared and revered by all, had just bent the very fabric of fate itself to claim an Omega who had been cast aside by her own people. Elara felt the weight of it all, the attention, the sudden shift in her place in the world. But there was something else too. For the first time, she felt a deep, undeniable connection to someone. King Rhyland's hand reached out, not with force, but with the gentleness of someone who had just discovered something precious. He cupped her chin and lifted her gaze to meet his. "Elara," he said softly, his voice low and full of authority, "you were always meant to be mine. Tonight, you've proven it to me, and to the entire kingdom." Elara's heart raced as she met his eyes. She saw the intensity of his power there, but there was something else too. Vulnerability, a reflection of the battle he had fought, not just with enemies, but with the shadows that haunted his own soul. She wanted to speak, to ask him why, how, but the words stuck in her throat. The realization that her life was about to change forever, that the man standing before her was not just a king, but her mate, overwhelmed her. She started, but her voice faltered. "You don't need to say anything," King Rhyland said, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "You've already said it all with that howl. You are more powerful than you know, Elara." The pack, still in stunned silence, began to react, some murmuring in awe, others in disbelief. But no one dared to question the Alpha King. The moment was undeniable. The bond between Elara and Rhyland was fated, sealed by the blood moon. It was a union that would shake the very foundation of their world. As King Rhyland gently guided Elara away from the center of the gathering, the pack parted, allowing them to pass. Elara walked beside him, her heart racing, not just from the shock of what had just transpired, but from the strength she felt growing inside her. She had never imagined that she could be the one to bring about such a change. And yet, here she was, walking by the side of the Alpha King, her mate. Their journey was just beginning, and Elara knew that whatever lay ahead, it would be nothing like the life she had known before. As they reached the edge of the clearing, King Rhyland stopped and turned to her. "There is much you need to learn, Elara," he said, his voice steady. "The power you've unlocked tonight is only the beginning. Together, we will face the challenges ahead." Elara nodded, her determination growing stronger with every word he spoke. The world had rejected her, but now, she was not just accepted, she was chosen. And with the Alpha King by her side, there was no limit to what she could accomplish. "I'm ready," she whispered, feeling the weight of her new reality settle over her. "I will stand by you, Rhyland, no matter what comes next." The Alpha King's eyes softened as he placed his hand over hers. "And I will never let you fall, Elara. You are mine, and I am yours. Together, we will shape the future of this kingdom." The two of them stood there, under the blood moon, as the pack watched in silence. The night was far from over, but Elara knew that this moment, this night, would be the beginning of everything. The Alpha King had claimed her, and in return, she had claimed her destiny. The kingdom would never be the same again. The days that followed Elara's claiming by King Rhyland were filled with uncertainty, excitement, and change. The kingdom buzzed with whispers, each rumor more outlandish than the last. Some said Elara was the chosen one who would bring peace to the fractured lands. Others whispered about the powers she had unlocked under the blood moon, but none of them knew the truth. Only Elara and King Rhyland understood the depth of their bond, and the responsibility that came with it. Elara spent the following weeks in the royal palace, a place she had never imagined stepping foot in, let alone becoming a part of. Every room she entered felt foreign, as though she was still a stranger to herself. Yet, there was an undeniable pull between her and the Alpha King that neither of them could deny. As the days passed, Elara began to learn the ways of the court. King Rhyland, despite his fearsome reputation, was patient with her, guiding her through the intricacies of royal life. He took her on long walks through the castle's gardens, where they spoke of everything and nothing. He shared stories of his childhood, of the battles he had fought to protect the kingdom, and the pain he carried from the curse that bound him. Elara listened intently, her heart opening to him in a way she had never expected. She had always thought of alphas as cold and distant, but Rhyland was different. There was warmth in him, a warmth that only she could see. She began to realize that the bond they shared was not just fated, it was forged in the fire of destiny. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, King Rhyland took Elara to the royal balcony. The view was breathtaking, the kingdom sprawled out before them, bathed in the golden light of twilight. Rhyland turned to her, his silver eyes searching hers as though he was looking for something only she could provide. "Elara," he said softly, "I need you to understand something. What we share is not just a bond of fate, it is a bond of power. You have awakened something in me that I thought was lost forever. Together, we are stronger than anyone can imagine." Elara felt a surge of emotion at his words. She had never known her own worth, had never understood why she was different. But now, standing beside Rhyland, she felt as though she was part of something much larger than herself, something that could change the world. "I understand," she whispered, her voice steady. "And I will stand by you, no matter what comes." Rhyland smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made his eyes soften. "I knew you would," he said. As the days turned into weeks, Elara grew stronger, more confident. She began to harness the power that had awoken within her, the power that came from the blood moon, and she realized that it was not just physical strength. It was the power to heal, to protect, to lead. She was no longer the Omega who had been cast aside, no longer the girl who had been rejected by her own pack. She was Elara, the mate of King Rhyland, and together they would rule the kingdom. But their bond was not without its challenges. There were those in the kingdom who still whispered against her, those who doubted her worth and questioned her place at Rhyland's side. They feared her power, and they feared what it meant for the future of the kingdom. But Rhyland never wavered. He stood by her, supported her, and made it clear that she was not just his mate, but his equal. One evening, as they stood together in the royal hall, a messenger arrived with urgent news. "Your Majesty," the messenger said, bowing deeply, "the neighboring kingdom has declared war. They have gathered their forces and are marching toward our borders." The news hit like a thunderclap. Elara could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the responsibility now placed on their shoulders. But as she looked at Rhyland, she saw something in his eyes, determination, strength, and an unwavering belief in their bond. He turned to her, his voice steady and resolute. "We will face this together, Elara. We will protect this kingdom, and we will show them what it means to stand united." Elara nodded, her heart swelling with pride. She was no longer the weak Omega who had been abandoned. She was the Alpha King's mate, and together they would fight for the kingdom and their future. The war was upon them. Elara could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her, the urgency in the air as the royal army prepared to face the enemy at the kingdom's borders. She stood beside King Rhyland, her heart beating in time with his steady, commanding presence. The palace had transformed in a matter of days, from a place of peace and security to one of preparation and tension. Soldiers lined the halls, their armor gleaming in the torchlight, while strategists and advisors gathered in the war rooms, poring over maps and plans. Elara had never imagined this world, the world of power, war, and command, but here she was, standing by the Alpha King, ready to fight. "We cannot afford to lose this battle," King Rhyland said, his voice low and filled with the kind of determination that sent a shiver down her spine. He turned to face her, his eyes filled with a mix of concern and resolve. "Elara, this is not just a fight for our kingdom. It's a fight for our future, for the future of the people we have vowed to protect." Elara nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Her role had changed drastically since the night of the blood moon. No longer just a rejected Omega, she was now the Alpha King's mate, a leader in her own right, and with that came a responsibility that she could no longer ignore. Her powers had grown stronger, her connection to the Alpha King deeper, but she knew that the battle ahead would test them in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. "I'm ready, Rhyland," she said, her voice steady, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I will fight beside you, no matter what happens." Rhyland smiled, a brief but sincere expression that made his features soften for just a moment. "I knew I could count on you, Elara," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Together, we are unstoppable." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the battlefield, Elara stood at the front lines with King Rhyland. The enemy forces, led by a ruthless warlord, had already crossed into their lands, and the time for diplomacy had passed. The battle would be decided on the field. Elara's heart pounded in her chest as the soldiers took their positions, the sound of swords being drawn and shields being readied echoing around them. She could feel the energy in the air, the crackling tension of an impending clash. "Remember your training," Rhyland said, his voice calm but commanding. "Stay focused and stay by my side. We will face this together." Elara nodded, feeling a surge of courage rise within her. She had spent the last few weeks learning the ways of war, training with the soldiers, honing her abilities. Her connection to Rhyland had only grown stronger, her powers more refined, and now she felt ready. As the first horn sounded, signaling the beginning of the battle, Elara's senses sharpened. The battlefield was a blur of movement, with soldiers clashing, swords meeting, shields, and the ground shaking beneath their feet. Elara fought with all the strength she had, her powers flaring as she healed the wounded and protected those in need. She could feel the pain of the soldiers, the fear, the adrenaline. It was overwhelming, but she embraced it, using it to fuel her actions. She could hear Rhyland's voice cutting through the chaos, commanding his troops with precision and authority. He was a king in every sense of the word, a leader who knew what needed to be done and did it without hesitation. As the battle raged on, Elara found herself face to face with the enemy's leader, a towering figure draped in dark armor. The warlord sneered at her, clearly unimpressed by the presence of an Omega on the battlefield. "You are no match for me, girl," he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. Elara met his gaze, unflinching, her heart steady. "You will learn that underestimating me is your greatest mistake," she said, her voice full of confidence. With a surge of energy, she lunged at him, her powers manifesting in a burst of light. The warlord tried to strike her down, but Elara's shield of energy blocked his blow, sending him stumbling back. "This kingdom will never fall to the likes of you," she declared, her power swirling around her. The battle continued to rage, but Elara felt a shift in the air. She could feel the tide turning, the enemy faltering as Rhyland's forces began to gain the upper hand. Together, they had proven to be an unstoppable force, and the warlord's forces began to retreat. The battle was won, but Elara knew that their victory was not just due to their strength in battle. It was the bond between her and Rhyland that had truly made them unstoppable. As the dust settled and the battlefield fell silent, Elara found herself standing next to Rhyland once more. The kingdom had been saved, but the war was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight, but Elara knew one thing for sure. She was no longer the Omega who had been rejected. She was the Alpha King's mate, and together, they would rule the kingdom with strength and honor. The victory on the battlefield had brought momentary relief to the kingdom, but Elara knew the peace would not last long. The enemy had been driven back, but the war was far from over. The neighboring kingdom, led by the ruthless warlord who had once underestimated her, would not rest until they had their revenge. King Rhyland stood by her side, his presence as commanding as ever, but Elara could see the weariness in his eyes. The weight of the crown, of leadership, was beginning to take its toll on him, though he hid it well. "We cannot afford another battle like this," Rhyland said, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "Our forces are stretched thin, and the resources of the kingdom are running low. We need allies, Elara, and we need them now." Elara nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The kingdom had won the battle, but it was only a matter of time before the war would escalate once more. "I will help you find those allies, Rhyland," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We will do this together, as we always have." The two of them spent the following days meeting with emissaries from other kingdoms, seeking alliances and forging new ties. Elara's role in these discussions was no longer just that of the silent Omega who had been rejected. She was now a queen in her own right, a leader whose voice mattered. She had grown into her power, her abilities no longer a mystery, but a strength that she wielded with grace and authority. As she sat at the table with the representatives of neighboring kingdoms, she felt the weight of her position, but she also felt the surge of energy that came from being part of something greater than herself. Rhyland had never once treated her as anything less than an equal, and with each passing day, Elara knew that their bond, their connection, was the true strength of the kingdom. But their journey together was not without challenges. As the negotiations continued, tensions between the kingdoms began to rise. The warlords' forces were regrouping, and word came that they were massing at the border once more, preparing for an attack that could wipe out everything they had fought for. Elara and Rhyland knew that time was running out. "We need to act quickly," Rhyland said, his voice sharp with urgency. "If we do not unite the kingdoms, if we do not stand together, we will fall." Elara placed a hand on his, her fingers, steady and strong. "We will unite them, Rhyland. I will not let you lose this kingdom. I will not let you lose the future we've fought for." Rhyland turned to her, his eyes filled with both gratitude and resolve. "And I will not lose you, Elara. Together, we are unstoppable." The days leading up to the next battle were filled with strategy and preparation. The armies gathered, the alliances were solidified, and Elara stood alongside Rhyland, ready to face whatever came next. They had fought through rejection, through doubt, and now, they would fight for the future of the kingdom and for the love they had discovered in each other. As the enemy forces approached, Elara felt a surge of power unlike anything she had ever experienced. Her connection to Rhyland had deepened, and now, standing at his side, she felt as though they were one. Two forces united in a cause greater than themselves. The battlefield loomed before them, a place where strength, courage, and destiny would collide. The enemy was fierce, but they had something the warlord's army did not. A bond forged in the heat of battle, a connection that no one could break. The clash was inevitable, but Elara knew that this time, it would be different. This time, they would not just fight for survival, they would fight for their future. As the first horn sounded, signaling the beginning of the battle, Elara stood tall, her heart steady, her mind clear. The kingdom had once rejected her, but now, they stood united, stronger than ever before. The Alpha King had claimed her, and she had claimed her destiny. Together, they would lead the kingdom into a new era, one where strength, unity, and love would reign supreme. The battle raged on, but Elara was no longer the girl who had been left behind. She was the queen, the mate of the Alpha King, and nothing could stand in their way. The battle had been long, but the kingdom had emerged victorious once again. The warlords' forces were scattered, and peace had returned to the lands, at least for now. Elara stood at the edge of the battlefield, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The sky above was streaked with the last light of the setting sun, casting a golden hue over the ruins of the battle. Bodies of fallen soldiers, both allies and enemies, littered the field, but Elara felt no satisfaction in the victory. The cost of war was always too high, and the weight of those losses hung heavy in the air. King Rhyland stood beside her, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the aftermath. His armor was battered, his face smeared with dirt and blood, but there was a quiet strength in his presence that made Elara's heart swell with pride. They had faced the greatest challenge of their lives, and together, they had overcome it. "We've won," Elara whispered, more to herself than to him. "But at what cost?" Rhyland turned to her, his silver eyes meeting hers with a depth that she had come to recognize as the reflection of his soul. "We fight to protect what matters," he said softly, his voice steady despite the devastation around them. "We fight for those we love, for the future we believe in. That is the price of leadership." Elara nodded, understanding his words, but a pang of sorrow still lingered in her heart. The war had taken its toll, not just on the kingdom, but on her as well. She had been thrust into this world of power and war, a world she had never imagined for herself. But now, standing beside Rhyland, she knew that her place was here, by his side. The bond they shared, forged in the heat of battle and sealed under the blood moon, was stronger than any enemy they would ever face. As the soldiers began to gather the fallen and tend to the wounded, Elara felt a pull deep within her, a desire to heal, to help those who had given so much in the name of the kingdom. She stepped forward, her hands glowing with a soft, golden light as she reached out to the wounded. Her powers, which had once been a mystery, now flowed through her with purpose. She healed the soldiers, mending broken bones and closing wounds, her energy connecting with theirs in a way that she had never experienced before. She was no longer the broken Omega. She was the queen, the mate of the Alpha King, and together, they had the power to change the world. As the last of the wounded were tended to, Elara looked up at Rhyland, her heart full of gratitude. He was watching her, his expression a mixture of admiration and awe. "You've changed, Elara," he said, his voice filled with a quiet wonder. "You've become something greater than even I could have imagined." Elara smiled, her eyes meeting his. "No, Rhyland," she said softly. "I've always been this. I just needed to find my place." Rhyland reached out, taking her hand in his. "And your place is by my side, always," he said, his voice resolute. "Together, we will lead this kingdom into a new era, one where strength and compassion go hand in hand." Elara squeezed his hand, the weight of his words settling in her heart. The future was uncertain, and there would always be more battles to fight, but she knew that with Rhyland by her side, they could face anything. The kingdom was theirs to protect, and with their bond, they were unstoppable. As the night descended over the battlefield, Elara and Rhyland stood together, watching the horizon as the stars began to twinkle above. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but they were ready. They had already conquered the greatest challenge. Now it was time to build a future worthy of the love and sacrifice that had brought them to this moment. As the days turned into weeks, the kingdom began to heal from the wounds of war, but the work was far from over. Elara stood beside King Rhyland, not as the Omega who had once been rejected, but as his queen, a powerful force in her own right. The bond between them had grown stronger with each passing day, and together, they faced the challenges that came with leadership. Their kingdom, though victorious, was still vulnerable. The war had left scars, on the land, on the people, and on Elara herself. The people had lost family, friends, and homes, and it was up to Rhyland and Elara to rebuild what had been broken. The task was daunting, but Elara had never felt more ready. She had discovered a strength within herself that she had never known existed, and she was determined to use it to guide the kingdom into a new era. One evening, as they walked through the palace gardens, Elara turned to Rhyland, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the moon. "Do you ever wonder what life could have been like if the war had never come to us?" she asked, her voice soft, yet filled with a quiet yearning. Rhyland looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment before he spoke. "I used to," he said. "I used to dream of a peaceful life, a life where I wasn't burdened by the weight of the crown, where I could live without the constant fear of enemies and betrayal. But then I met you, Elara, and I realized that peace isn't just something that happens. It's something we build together." Elara's heart swelled at his words, and she reached out to take his hand. "Together," she echoed, feeling the power of that simple word. Their journey had not been easy, and it would only get harder, but they had each other. That was all that mattered. "We will build it," she said, her voice steady. "We will create the peace we deserve, for our people, for our future." The war was not the only battle they would face. There were political challenges, unrest among some of the noble houses, and the constant threat of those who sought to tear them apart. But Elara was no longer the scared Omega hiding in the shadows. She had found her place, not just beside Rhyland, but as his equal. She had the strength to stand up for what she believed in, to fight for the future she envisioned. And Rhyland, the Alpha King, was by her side, trusting her, supporting her, and loving her. Together, they were unstoppable. As the days passed, the people began to see the changes that Elara and Rhyland were bringing. There was a shift in the air, a new sense of hope, and for the first time in years, the kingdom felt united. The scars of war were slowly healing, and the people began to rebuild their lives with a newfound sense of purpose. But even in this new era of peace, danger still lurked in the shadows. A letter arrived one morning, sealed with the emblem of a distant kingdom. Rhyland read it, his expression hardening. Elara, sensing the shift in his mood, moved closer. "What is it?" she asked. "A new threat," Rhyland said quietly, his eyes darkening. "Another kingdom, one we once called an ally, has begun to make moves on our borders. They think we are weak because of the war, but they are gravely mistaken. Elara felt the familiar surge of determination rise within her. We won't let them take what we've worked so hard for, she said. Firmly. Rhyland nodded, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity that spoke volumes. No, we won't, he agreed. Together, we will face this threat, just as we've faced everything else. We will protect our kingdom, our people, and our future. Elara felt the power of their bond more strongly than ever. She had once been the Omega who had been rejected, cast aside as weak and unworthy, but now, she was the queen of a kingdom, the mate of the Alpha King, and the woman who would stop at nothing to protect everything she had fought for. With Rhyland by her side, she knew they could face any challenge that came their way. The journey ahead would not be easy, but they would face it together, stronger than ever before. And no one, no enemy, no force, would stand in their way. The kingdom would remain theirs, and they would build the peace they had always dreamed of, one battle at a time. The days that followed the arrival of the letter were filled with tension and uncertainty. Elara and Rhyland knew that the peace they had worked so hard to build was fragile, and now, a new threat loomed on the horizon. The distant kingdom that had once been their ally was now turning its gaze toward them, and they were determined to test the strength of their resolve. As the news spread throughout the kingdom, whispers of an impending conflict began to surface. Elara could feel the anxiety in the air, the uncertainty of the people as they waited for what would come next. Yet, as always, she stood by Rhyland, ready to face whatever challenge was thrown their way. She had come a long way from the broken Omega who had been rejected. Now, she was his queen, his equal, and she would not let their kingdom fall. We will not be caught off guard again, Rhyland said one evening, his tone grim as he stood in the war room, surrounded by advisors and generals. This time, we will strike first. Elara stood beside him, her gaze unwavering. She had been by his side through every battle, every hardship, and now, as they prepared for yet another fight, she felt the weight of the crown and her responsibilities more than ever. What do we need to do? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling within her. Rhyland turned to face her, his silver eyes meeting hers with the trust and admiration he had always shown. We need to unite the people, Elara, he said softly. We need to make them believe that together, we are stronger than any enemy. We cannot let them see fear. They must see our strength, our resolve. Elara nodded, her heart swelling with pride. She had learned much over the years, not just about power and leadership, but about herself. The woman who had once doubted her worth was no longer the same. She had found her place, not just beside Rhyland, but in the heart of the kingdom, where she could make a difference. We will show them what we are capable of, Elara said, her voice filled with conviction. Together, we will protect this kingdom, and we will build the future we promised. Over the next few weeks, Elara and Rhyland worked tirelessly to strengthen their defenses and rally their allies. They met with the leaders of neighboring kingdoms, solidifying their relationships and ensuring that they would stand together against the coming threat. Rhyland's leadership was unmatched, but Elara's influence was equally important. She spoke with the people, assuring them that they had nothing to fear, that their strength came from unity. As the days passed, the preparations for war became more intense. The once peaceful landscape now buzzed with the sound of soldiers marching, weapons being forged, and strategies being drawn up. But despite the looming conflict, Elara found moments of peace with Rhyland. They would steal away to the palace gardens, where they could talk without the weight of the kingdom pressing down on them. Do you ever wish things were different? Elara asked one evening as they sat beneath the stars, the cool night air filling their lungs. Do you ever wish we could just live in peace? Rhyland looked at her, his expression softening. Of course I do, he said quietly. I've dreamed of a life where we don't have to fight, where we can simply be together. But that's not the world we live in. We fight so that others don't have to. We fight so that the next generation can know peace, even if it's not the one we'll see. Elara took his hand, squeezing it gently. We will see it, Rhyland. We will see the peace we've fought for, and we will build it together. The next day, the army marched out to meet the enemy. Elara stood with Rhyland, her heart heavy with the weight of the battle ahead. The kingdom's future rested on their shoulders, and there was no turning back. As they approached the battlefield, Elara felt a surge of power within her. The connection between her and Rhyland had deepened, and she could feel his strength, his determination, fueling her own. They were unstoppable together. The battle was fierce, but as the sun began to set, Elara knew that victory was within their grasp. The enemy had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. As the final blow was struck, and the last of the enemy forces fled, Elara stood tall, her heart filled with both pride and sorrow. They had won, but the cost had been high. The kingdom had been tested, and once again, they had emerged victorious. As the soldiers celebrated, Elara and Rhyland stood together, their hands clasped, their gazes locked. The road ahead would still be difficult, but Elara knew one thing for sure: they would face it together. The kingdom was theirs to protect, and with their bond, they were unstoppable. The victory in battle had brought a sense of relief, but Elara and Rhyland knew that the true test of their leadership was just beginning. The kingdom had been through so much already, but there were still challenges ahead, and their strength would be tested in ways they had never imagined. As the days turned into months, Elara and Rhyland worked tirelessly to rebuild what had been lost. They worked to mend the wounds left by war, not just physically, but emotionally, for the people who had sacrificed so much. Their leadership was not just about victory on the battlefield. It was about healing, unity, and ensuring that the future of the kingdom would be brighter than the past. Rhyland had always been a warrior, a king destined to lead, but with Elara by his side, he had become something more. Someone who understood that true strength came not just from fighting, but from the love and loyalty of those around him. Elara had always felt like an outsider in her own world, but now, standing beside Rhyland, she knew she had found her place. She was not just the mate of the Alpha King, she was his equal, his partner in every sense of the word. Together, they had faced countless trials, and together, they would continue to face whatever challenges came their way. As they stood in the royal chambers one evening, looking out over the kingdom they had fought to protect, Elara felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. The kingdom was healing, the people were rebuilding, and though there was still work to be done, Elara knew they were on the right path. "We've come a long way," Elara said softly, her voice full of both gratitude and awe. "And there's still so much to do." Rhyland turned to her, his silver eyes filled with warmth. "We will do it together," he said. "We always will." Elara smiled, her heart swelling with love for the man who had become her partner in life, her rock in the storm. "Together," she echoed. As they stood side by side, Elara knew that their love, their bond, was unbreakable. It had been tested in the fires of war, forged in the crucible of adversity, and now, nothing could stand in their way. They were not just rulers, they were a symbol of hope, of strength, and of the power that came from unity. The kingdom had rejected Elara once, had cast her aside as weak and unworthy, but now, she stood beside the Alpha King as his queen, his mate, his equal. Together, they would continue to lead the kingdom into a future of peace, of prosperity, and of love. The battle for their future had been won, but the real work, building that future, protecting it, and ensuring that the kingdom would thrive, was just beginning. With Rhyland by her side, Elara knew there was nothing they could not overcome. They had already faced the greatest challenge of all, the fight to find each other, and now, they would face whatever came next, together. In this captivating werewolf story, we follow the journey of Elara, a rejected Omega who is born without a wolf, and her unexpected rise to power alongside King Rhyland, the Alpha King. In a world ruled by wolves, Elara was once cast aside due to her inability to shift into a wolf, but her life takes a dramatic turn when she discovers her hidden power during the blood moon. As the story unfolds, Elara and Rhyland form a deep bond that transcends their roles as Alpha and Omega, leading them to fight for their kingdom's future. Together, they face political intrigue, war, and personal trials, proving that love, strength, and unity can overcome any obstacle. With thrilling battles, powerful werewolf lore, and a love story that defies fate, this tale explores the true meaning of power, sacrifice, and destiny. As Elara steps into her role as queen, her journey teaches us that even the most underestimated can rise to greatness. Will Elara and Rhyland's love be enough to protect their kingdom from the looming threats of war and betrayal? This werewolf story will keep you on the edge of your seat as it delves into themes of leadership, loyalty, and the power of the werewolf bond. Join them on a journey of discovery, resilience, and the fight for peace in a world of wolves.